Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Carefulist, the podcast. We are excited to welcome Esther Greenhouse to the show. We are so happy that you're here. And I think the best place for us to start is with your caregiving story. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. So my caregiving story has a couple of starting points,
Mm.
depending on how you want to look at it. One way is that when my mom was almost 80, we had been encouraging her to move near us so that we could help her.
Mm.
And she did. My husband was a custom home builder. And of course, I'm an environmental gerontologist. And so we designed and built a house for her to successfully age in place in. It was next door to our home. And when she moved up, she already had several chronic health conditions. She had high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes. She was obese. She had COPD. She had sleep apnea. She had heart disease. And she was pretty independent. The biggest issue she faced at the time was she was beginning to have mobility issues. She was
Mm.
losing her balance.
Yeah.
Um, so that's one phase of where it began. That's the latest and most discreet. And of course, as her needs progressed, my caregiving role increased.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
the my caregiving journey actually goes back much farther than that, um, because the type of dynamic that we had in the household was that I was elevated into this role of my
Mhm.
mom's confidant, my mom's emotional caregiver.
Mm.
Um, my parents were both war survivors. And while they, in many ways, lived excellent lives, every bill was paid on time, the house was spotless, they did great work at their jobs. They really, really struggled with the trauma. And so at an early age, my mom kind of pulled me into this role of caring for her. And
Sure.
that really shifted when I was 13 and my father died unexpectedly.
Oh.
My parents were in their early 50s at the time. And so now it became not just emotional support, but also practical support in
Hmm.
um, mowing the lawn and shoveling the snow. And
Right.
she even
Right.
had me give input on, decisions, financial decisions.
Hmm.
So it's been a lifelong relationship. And then, of course, anytime my mother had a health event, for example, I was in my mid 20s when I was pursuing a master's degree, and suddenly I got a call that she had had a heart attack. So I
Oh.
flew there to help her.
Mhm.
And then anytime she had a procedure, I was the one who went to support her through the event.
Right. Right. So, I mean, this truly is a lifelong version of your relationship. It's not strictly mother-daughter, it's caregiver from a very early age in
Yes.
really multifaceted caregiver.
Yes.
Yeah. And so thank you for sharing that because I think there are more people out there who provide that type of support and care to parents early on, um, than really is talked about or is publicly known. So thank you for being willing to share that. And I hope that it becomes more of a conversation moving forward.
Yes, me too. And I should also add that I'm not the oldest and I'm not the only child. And my sister is 6 years older, and there was just something with the dynamic between the two of them that my mom wouldn't let her help, and
Mm.
her approach to helping was different than mine, and
Mhm.
that's not a criticism or a judgment. It's just different. But
Yeah.
even whatever she offered, my mother wasn't comfortable accepting.
Mm.
And but she was more than comfortable asking anything and everything of me.
Mhm. And that can be challenging too, because there is that dynamic where the other sibling wants to help and wants to contribute, and then the other sibling is going, well, she doesn't want that, but it's falling to me, and that can create challenges in families as well.
Right. And I should say there was limited willingness to help. And
Mm.
certainly in the later years when I asked for help, I did not get any.
Ah, yep.
And it was, sometimes people, siblings divide things up like, okay, you're the one who's really close by physically.
Mhm.
So you're going to take mom to the doctor and provide
Right.
that type of care, but siblings who are farther away may manage the finances or research medical issues and medical
Yes.
solutions. And I really didn't have that.
Mm. Well, I'm sorry about that, because it is so much for one person to bear. And one of the things um, that is really important to me is showing people that you can caregive remotely, you can contribute.
Yes.
And that was my role as a caregiver in my family. I lived a couple of hours away, but I saw how much work my dad and my sister were doing. And it's not fair for it to all fall on one person.
Right.
It shouldn't fall on one person. And this day and age with technology, you can help even if you're a world away. There are things you can do.
Mhm.
Um, so that's a topic for a different podcast. We'll come back around to that. But from what you mentioned, you're an environmental gerontologist. Can you
Mhm.
explain that to people who might not be familiar?
Sure. It's a pretty unique profession. So essentially, an environmental gerontologist studies or focuses on the relationship between aging, older adults, and the built environment.
Mm.
So I have a unique constellation of expertise. I have expertise in design, environmental psychology, gerontology, and city and regional planning.
Mm. Wow. So when that constellation comes together, it looks like
Terrific question. What do you do? So up until recently, this looked like a variety of different things.
Mhm.
Um, so, for example, I consulted on the design of the nation's first elder-focused emergency department. Um,
Wow.
I yes, a pretty cool project. I helped to develop the one of the first age-friendly centers for excellence, and I served as the strategic director. Um, I've done a lot of strategy work in terms of creating strategic initiatives. One project, for example, was co-developing AARP International's Equity by Design initiative. And the two pillars of that are equity, which we're all familiar with that concept, and the other is enabling, which is the enabling design approach, which I
Mm.
created. And the Equity by Design initiative um, has a goal of helping to create enabling and equitable housing and multi-generational communities.
That's fantastic. So essentially, what it is that you do is you help people who are looking to design a building or a section of a building and optimize it so that it is accessible and useful for aging and physically disabled adults. Is that
No,
correct?
very,
No?
very infrequently. No, no. So with a few projects like the elder focused emergency department, yes, that was the case.
Mhm.
But mostly what I'm doing is creating strategies from a larger scale to really shift the direction of what we're doing.
Mm.
Because very few people know and understand, even um, architects and builders, developers, that the design of the status quo is actually ageist by design. It's
Mm. Yes.
actually disabling. And so my work with these initiatives is really to shift the paradigm
Hmm.
and get people to understand that the built environment is actually a significant variable in how successfully we age. And the issue is that the status quo is not properly designed. It's
Hmm.
ideally designed for the average height male, which is approximately 5'9". It's designed for people with high physical, sensory, and cognitive abilities, and everyone else has to adapt. And the farther you are from that design norm, the more you will struggle to adapt. And so
Right.
we really see that as people age, as their abilities change, and they can be changing over time, or sometimes they will change um, somewhat abruptly or discreetly with a health event. But
Hmm.
the relationship with the built environment is ever present and ongoing. So, some of the work that I do is getting people to understand, for example, that home modifications um, can be very valuable. But the problem with home modifications are that very few people implement them.
Hmm.
They tend to implement them after the fact, after there's been a significant change to a person's abilities. Well, we don't
Right.
want to wait for that, right? We want people to live in environments that are enabling them to be as independent as possible, do
Right.
as much as possible. We want to remove this negative variable that actually can contribute to frailty unnecessarily. So some of the work I've done in the past, for example, for several years, I was a national instructor for the National Association of Home Builders, and I taught their certified aging in place specialist course. It's
Mm.
also referred to as CAPS. And
Hmm.
the CAPS course is to train professionals, builders, designers, remodelers, um, as well as OTs and PTs and allied professionals to understand how they can help a family renovate their home for successful aging in place, or how they can build a new home. And I want to use this moment to share a really crucial perspective. There's been increasing emphasis on aging in place over the past 10 to 15 years.
Yes.
And some misconceptions about it are one, that aging in place, like it's something that we have to get people to do or help them do. And over 90% of older adults are aging in place.
Yes.
It's the default, it's the
Right.
norm. And the other thing we need to recognize is that without any kind of preparation or being thoughtful and informed, aging in place is not the answer. We want to
Hmm.
focus on successful aging in place. And one of
Yes.
the key components of that is where you live. So the design of your home, it may be even the design of your community,
Hmm.
how how independent can you be in the community? And if you
Right.
get some assistance, because it's totally fine to get assistance, and what we want with assistance is whether it's in physical in terms of the design of the environment, or it's maybe a service or a
Mhm.
person. We want that assistance to bridge the gap between what my abilities are and what the task is.
Right. Yeah. So bringing that back a little bit to something that you had just mentioned, I think this sort of factors into the concept of longevity planning.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about longevity planning and what that is and what it
Yes.
entails?
Yes. So, longevity planning, from my perspective, is preparing for a successful future. Increasingly, there's emphasis, for example, like through the Stanford Center on Longevity and other institutions, about preparing for the 100-year life.
Mhm.
So there are a few key components to that. So one is health and wellness. How are you taking care of yourself? What is your lifestyle? What medical conditions do you have? Do you have access to healthy food? Do you have access to good medical care?
Mhm.
And we know that if we eat more healthfully and we're more physically active, then we're minimizing some of the threats to our longevity.
Right.
Likewise, we know that finances play a difference, right? So it costs a lot of money to to be taken care of if you need assistance, whether
Yes.
that's a home health care aide coming in a few times a week, or more extensive services cost money. So essentially, people focus on health and they focus on finances.
Mhm.
And those can be broken out into further categories. So, for example, with finances, some people invest and prepare for their retirement, right? So
Mhm.
they maybe work with a financial planner, they have a 401k account, they may have other investments. Some people purchase long term care insurance. So
Mhm.
these are things that are helping people have the money for long term care and assistance if they should need it.
Right.
But the work that I do as a longevity strategist is to help reduce the need. So, going back to the category of health, let's break that out into multiple categories. So, we talked
Mhm.
about healthy lifestyle, nutrition, activity. Another component is where you live. So, it's
Right.
the design of your home and the design of your community. So, we've chatted in the past about my work, and really the shift that I've made in the past year or so is shifting to help people maintain their physical and financial independence as they age. So I primarily do that by working with financial planning firms and the long-term care insurance sector.
Excellent. So in one of our previous conversations, you talked about when you made the move and your mother came closer to live near you, um, over time, what you were able to save and the care you were able to provide because of some basic changes that you made. Can
Yes,
you talk a little bit about that and let people give some things to, think about what they
right,
might be able to do in their situation?
right, right. So I developed something many years ago called the enabling design approach.
Mhm.
And it came out of the research I had read over various years. And it also came out of my work in the early parts of my career when I was advocating for design that worked across the lifespan and the ability span.
Yeah.
I often got the response that that's great, but we really can't design for a subset of the population. And
It's
my
not so much a subset.
right. Right. It's not remotely a subset. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So older adults, I mean, just the boomers alone are a huge percentage of our population.
Yeah.
But the thing is, my response to people was, well, that's great because actually that's what we do now.
Mm.
So the enabling design approach has three pillars to
Okay.
the framework. So the first pillar is the concept of environmental fit and press, and that comes from environmental psychology. And distilled to its essence, it's very simple and it's very powerful.
Mm.
When there's a good fit between a person and their environment, you can have high functioning, right? They can be as independent as possible.
Yes.
And it's not only the built environment, that's the main area that my firm focuses on in terms of that role, but it's also in terms of things like services, or if you live in a care facility, what's the protocol of care? So really the goal should be to enable people to function at their highest level.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And another component of that is the greater the gap between what an environment demands of me and what my abilities are, the more I'm artificially pushed to a lower level of functioning.
Yes.
So when we think about the older population, we think about caregiving. One example is the ability to take a shower.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I'm living in a traditional house that has a tub and shower combination,
Mm-hmm.
and it's challenging for me to step up over that tub wall,
Right.
especially once I've showered and things are wet, right? I'm much more
Yes.
likely to lose my balance. And so if I have that and I don't have grab bars,
Mm-hmm.
or even if I have grab bars and I really don't have the strength and balance to step over that wall, a couple of things are going to happen. If we don't change the environment and nobody's assisting me, I'm either going to push myself to bathe under those unsafe conditions
Right.
and end up having a fall
Mm-hmm.
and all of the myriad of problems that come with that.
Yes.
Or I'm going to pull back and I'm going to bathe less,
Right.
which has its own host of problems.
Yes.
Excuse me.
I
So,
I completely identify with that in my own way. I had two C-sections when my kids were born, and having that type of abdominal surgery, just lifting your foot that little bit to try to get into the tub, it hurts. And if
it
you don't
hurt.
have somebody there, you're off your balance and you can't fall. So even if you're not older and having your
Absolutely.
house set the way it should be for an older adult, if you have a surgery as a young, healthy person who just
Mhm.
happily welcomed a bundle of joy,
Right.
you can also experience those same challenges.
Right,
So,
right. And that's a really good point. So before I talk about the next
mhm.
pillars, one thing is that in my view, grab bars should be in every bathroom. They should be standard because they're like a handrail on a staircase. You never know
Yes.
when you're going to need them, and you can use that as additional balance. And for example, during pregnancy.
Hmm.
But I also always say that um, who needs to step up and over in a wet, slippery environment? You know, the other population that falls a lot in the bathroom are children
Yes.
because they are struggling to get up and over.
Right.
And that brings me to another thing that I often say. I used to teach design studios at Cornell, and I say that my if my students had designed our housing and communities the way they are, I
Mhm.
would either fail them or have them redo the project,
Yeah.
because that gets to the second pillar of the enabling design approach, which is the fact that the status quo of how we design and build is not for the lifespan and the ability span. It's
Right.
not intentional. No one's trying to exclude anyone or disable anyone, but our data and our conventions and our codes result in places and in products that work really well for the average height male, again, somewhere around 5'9", who has
Hmm.
high physical, sensory, and cognitive abilities.
Yes.
Now, I never will meet that criteria because I'm 5'1.5", and
Hmm.
I have sensory processing disorder and two visual processing disorders. So my
Hmm.
entire life, I have struggled to function in the built environment, almost any built environment that I'm in,
Right.
which is really what led me to this work.
Yeah.
And then the third pillar of the enabling design approach is looking at societal issues and problems, looking at economics, looking at policies through the lens of the first two pillars.
Hmm.
You know, if we know that people struggle to be independent and become artificially dependent and frail because of
Hmm.
how we design. And then we know that the way we're building is excluding them out, and it's exacerbating that gap between abilities and what the environment demands. We need to make some changes. We need to look
Yes.
at the costs. So I do this work in helping educate professionals, in helping develop initiatives, in helping, for example, communities, municipalities, senior living communities to change what they're doing so they change the environment. I do this because this is the right thing to do. But I
Yes.
know that there's a financial aspect to everything. Like we have to
Right.
typically have a financial argument. So you and I've talked in the past about when I've applied the enabling design approach to my mother's later
Hmm.
years, what were the impacts?
Yeah.
So the impacts were that she was able to successfully age in place in her home of choice.
Hmm.
She had had to move her mother into a nursing home, because the design of the ranch house that we were living in as a multi-generational family did
Hmm.
not allow my grandmother to access the bathroom independently because she used a walker for rheumatoid arthritis.
Okay.
And my mother never got over that. She felt very guilty.
Yeah.
Um, and she was very afraid of having to live in a care facility.
Hmm.
And by making sure that her home had features that are not radical,
Hmm.
this is zero step entry to the home. There were wider doorways. There was no grade changes on the first floor of the house.
Hmm.
Um, she had a bathroom with grab bars in it, non-glare lighting throughout the home. There were a lot of simple features, um,
Hmm.
very few of which cost any extra money. They just required a little bit of planning, and awareness.
Right.
Because of those features, she was able to delay moving to a facility by at least 7 years. The design of the home made the provision of assistance or care in the home easier and more efficient.
Mhm.
Um, and that savings of avoiding moving to a facility by about 7 years saved the family and the government somewhere between 500,000 and $1.5 million.
That's just incredible. You know, you mentioned the ranch house and she was on a walker, which most people don't think is that wide. But if you think about the doorways in your home, if you've ever carried a laundry basket, that's about the same width as a walker. If you've
Yes.
hit your elbows or hit your knuckles
Yep.
on the doorway as you're going through, a walker and a wheelchair aren't going to fit.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
So that's a good quick test, I think, of your own living space or the other place where your loved one is. Get a laundry basket and see if you can comfortably fit through there. And if you can't, um, you have some things to think about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the big thing to recognize is, um, this isn't rocket science. We're not talking about um, designing our homes in radically different ways and like
Right.
everybody needs to live in a geodesic dome so that they can successfully age in place. This is just shifting things from the norm.
Yes.
And it has huge impact. So when I say that if my students had designed the world the way it is, I would either fail them or have them redo the project. It's
Mhm.
not because I'm a meanie.
Right.
It's because it's just good design.
Yes. It needs to function for everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah. Something that you've talked about earlier and I've been thinking about since you mentioned it. Um, for those of you who are in the audience who are left-handed, you know better than most
Yes.
that this world was not designed for everyone. My both of my kids are lefties. My husband and I are right-handed. And I mean, I remember being in elementary school and there was like one pair of left-handed scissors and
Yeah.
that was it. But now in my home where we're half and half, we've made accommodations just for that. And we've had to rethink the way they use things. And there's many kitchen tools that are not intuitive for them that
Yeah.
I've had to rethink how I show them how to use it, or, we get something else. So I'm just trying to think of other things that people might have some experience with
Yes.
that you can connect with that and start thinking a little bit more broadly how these things affect other people in the population.
That's right. Thank you for that. Yeah. And
Sure.
again, back to the concept of height.
Yes.
The world is not designed for um, short people, you know.
Right. It's true.
So there we need to have adaptability designed in.
Hmm.
And is there enough of that designed in? And of course, my experience is no. But that's another thing. So again, I invite your podcast followers to think about things in their home that create barriers and how can they tweak them. So,
Hmm.
example, things like lighting can be an issue of having a dimmer switch installed. It can
Mm.
be things like, so for example, in a kitchen, you want different options with lighting. You want recessed lighting or some type of lighting in the ceiling, whether it's recessed or it's surface mounted. Now, one of my visual processing disorders actually makes me very sensitive to light and to glare.
Hmm.
So um, we make sure that if they're recessed cans, if we install recessed cans in a room, that they're ones that are truly recessed. So I have as little glare as possible. They're also
Hmm.
on a dimmer. I also in the kitchen have under cabinet lighting. And sometimes I even will do things like I'll bring in a table lamp and plug it in and have it on the counter, and I'll turn all the other lights off. And I'll just have this soft, low glare lighting
Mhm.
in this one small area where I'm working.
Right.
The other
Yeah.
thing, is to think about too that people don't necessarily have to do a full house remodel, and they can be thinking about things like if they're updating a bathroom at any age to widen that doorway, to make sure that there's enough room for a person using a walker or receiving assistance. I used to get calls from people and emails that, oh, my mom is coming to stay with us at Thanksgiving, and I don't know how she's going to get into the bathroom and use the bathroom.
Right.
So this is the kind of thing that you need to be thinking of ahead of time. If you're looking for a new residence, look at the features there. If
Mm.
you're finally renovating the kitchen and you're building that dream kitchen, simple things like making sure that the key items are within the ideal reach range, which is about 24 to 44 inches
Mm.
above the ground. And the other thing is, while it's very efficient from a spatial use perspective, no more microwaves above the range,
Yes.
because
Yes.
reaching above a hot stove
And then pulling something hot
and then
down.
pulling something hot down. So it
Yes.
should not be above the stove. It should not be in upper cabinets. It should be at counter height. And the other thing is, again, thinking about all ages and stages, is there's a lot that kids can do independently with using the microwave.
Hmm.
And if they
Right.
can't reach it, how are they going to heat up something for their breakfast or an after school snack or so on?
Right.
Again, it's about thinking for the lifespan and the ability span.
Sure. And to go off of that, thinking about my own kids, we have a microwave that is on the counter. We don't have a high one, but I know plenty of kids who would just go get a chair and
Yes,
push it up. And then so now they're on a chair and they're holding something hot. And yeah, that's just recipe for an accident.
right. That's right. That's right. It's problematic.
Yeah. So you just mentioned a slew of things that people can be thinking about. Is there anything that somebody could do right now to make a better plan for their future?
I think essentially the things that I talked about, but the essence is to understand that there is this hidden threat to healthy longevity, to longevity planning, to successfully aging in place. And while it can be upsetting to know that there's this insidious threat,
Mhm.
there's so much you can do about it, and it's not radical. So people can be selective about where they choose to live. They can look for housing in communities that have features that work for the lifespan. Again, when they're renovating their homes, they're doing that kitchen remodel, they're updating a bathroom, they're putting on an addition. That's the time to make sure, well, does this work for people at all ages and stages? Does this work for people of different sizes?
Right.
And again, it's not that we're trying to bring handicap accessible design to our homes. It's that we're trying to have good design that works for the
Yes.
lifespan.
Right. And I think that is the key phrase, design that works for the lifespan.
Right.
Ideally, it is set up so you don't have to make modifications no matter what happens.
100%.
Your
100%.
home is just your home and it is ready for you, whatever happens.
Exactly. Exactly. So the work that we're doing now is working through financial planners and
Mhm.
the long-term care insurance industry to help them help their clients. And whether that's a client who is older and may need care soon,
Mhm.
um, that can also, by helping um, the firms enable their older clients, the older generation, to reduce preventable long-term care needs and
Mhm.
costs, a lot of things happen. You improve the quality of life. You help preserve their finances, and that you help minimize the caregiving demands on the younger generation. So, other aspects of that we're also doing are strategy sessions with individuals and families to help them assess what's happening in their lives. And this is the design of where they live is a component of this, but this is really getting to that larger aspect of caregiving. And that's really bringing a lot of the work the experience that I had as my mother's primary caregiver for 10 years is helping people see what should they be prioritizing.
Right.
Because one of the things that I really wished I had when I was caring for my mom was a guide, somebody to
Yes.
take me by the hand and say, this is what you need to do.
Right.
Um, because even though I had so much expertise and was aware of so much with aging services, when you're a caregiver, you're typically you often become a caregiver because there's an urgent event that changes
Yes.
things.
Right.
And then what I see over and over again, and I experience myself, is that going from that urgent event to the next one, people don't typically come all the way down to their baseline of being calm. They don't take out time and say, how is everything working? What needs aren't being met? What should we change? What services are we lacking? They're just holding on and treading water
Yes.
until the next event comes along.
Right. Right. So you've shared an incredible amount of advice and things to think about. And you said something that really resonated with me because I felt the same way. I kept finding myself going, there has to be a guide. There has to be somebody I can talk to who can walk me through this and help us know what's next. Um, and I had some really good conversations with people. They weren't holistic views because we don't
Right.
necessarily have that available yet, although some of us are working on that.
Yes. Thank
Um,
you, Katie.
it's myself and there are others as well. But
Yes.
I'm curious if through all of that, there was a piece of advice that you received from someone that you found helpful that you could share beyond all of this good
Yes.
stuff that you've already talked about.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the piece of advice that was really important was actually somebody told me this in relation to raising children. So
Mm,
because for part of this time, I was um, in what Phyllis Moen termed the sandwich generation.
Yeah.
And so I was raising my son and I was caring for my mother. And then when my son went to college, I was in a different kind of sandwich. My husband was being treated for cancer. And so I was caring for him and caring for my mother. And that was during COVID. So I had to let go of any home health aides because I couldn't
Right.
risk anyone bringing COVID into the family circle.
Hmm.
But the advice that I had been given was, if you do what's best for you, it will be best for them.
Yes. Oh, that's good.
It's good, but I'll tell you the part two that I think a lot of your listeners are going to relate to.
Mhm.
I didn't apply the advice enough. And I think a lot of it was my specific dynamics with my mom, that I had been her caregiver to some extent for my entire life. It's also the kind of person I am, put
Mhm.
others first.
Right.
And while my mother, on one hand, was incredibly appreciative of all that I and my husband and my son were doing for her, um, she often also made me feel guilty.
Yeah.
Like if I took an exercise class or I took my dog and we went for a hike all morning.
Hmm.
So I think my big piece of advice is um, to find somebody who can help you outside of the family. So whether it's a life coach, whether it's a therapist, whether it's clergy, somebody that you can talk to who can help you. Because I think we all have to make some changes when we're on the caregiving journey.
Yeah.
The whole other aspect of this is what it's like to be cared for and dependent. And I
Hmm.
think what I'm seeing over and over again in our society is we're barely touching upon that. People are
Yes.
not receiving the support they need for these major, in many cases, negative life changes they're really struggling
Hmm.
with. Um, but as a caregiver, you need to get that assistance and you need to make some changes in how you handle things, because if you don't, it will have negative health repercussions. And it did. I suffered from adrenal fatigue and burnout. I was officially diagnosed with that, and
Hmm.
it's been a road to recovery. And there's of course a
Yes.
lot of data on the health impacts um, on caregivers.
Absolutely. And the older the caregiver, the greater the health impact.
Exactly,
So
because
yeah.
that's right. And I often would say to my mother, when I was pushing her in her wheelchair or helping her get into a wheelchair, that I was grateful that she had me at 40,
Hmm.
because I was a younger caregiver to a certain extent.
Yes. Right.
Um, and so I think ultimately, to sum up, the advice is get emotional help for and support for yourself, and
Mhm.
also get it for your loved one, the care
Yes.
recipient. This stuff is hard.
Yes. And sometimes having that third party, you're not dumping your feelings on one another and creating tension between your relationship there. And having that third party can really help to alleviate some of that. And it is natural and it is normal to get frustrated
Right.
and to be tired and to feel like it's not fair, because more often than not, let's be honest, it's not fair. It's
Mhm.
not fair to you. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to the rest of your family. Um, and you need somewhere to go that you can say those things free of judgment and just get them off your chest. Because if you don't, it will fester. And just that alone can help lead to burnout and make you physically ill.
Right. That's right. That's right. And also, this ties into the whole thing of what are your roles? So,
Right.
it was really hard late in the caregiving journey. My mother started to articulate, like, I want you to be my daughter. I don't want
Mm,
you to be my doctor, and I don't want you to be trying to enforce all these things.
yep.
And I said, well, I would prefer to just be your daughter too, but you asked me to take on this role and I accepted.
Mhm.
And it I think another piece of advice is for people to think a little bit more about how what they want their roles to be, and are there ways that they can um, make those roles more discreet. So sometimes being like, you know what, I'm just coming over this afternoon as your daughter
Yes.
for a visit. Um, Easy to say, challenging to do, but I think it's something
Yes, it does.
important. It's something important to keep in mind.
It is important. And it's super important as well to have these conversations when people are healthy and when nothing is wrong. So that when something does happen, you already have a plan. The roles are defined.
Yes.
Obviously, you need to be flexible because one diagnosis is going to be very, very different from a different kind of diagnosis and what's required. But having those open conversations when things aren't going wrong is
Mhm.
so much easier than when you're in the thick of it and in crisis mode. I mean,
Right.
those are just
But a
two
lot of
very
people
different
are,
situations.
yeah. And the thing is, I tried to have that conversation with my mom. I had just graduated from college, and my mom was in her early 60s and retired. She had just retired. And
Mhm.
I said, look, I have all this expertise. Let's put it to good use and make a plan. Let's explore all these different scenarios. And her response was literally, I do not have one foot in the grave yet. I will not talk about this.
Yeah.
And
And that's common.
that's common. So I think so that's one of the reasons that we offer these strategy sessions
Yeah.
is I while I was the caregiver, my first concern is, if you're the care recipient, what do you want and what
Right.
do you need? Right?
Yeah.
Um, but the other issue is that if the person that you would provide care for is not willing to have a conversation,
Hmm.
you can make plans as well. And you can
Right.
think about, what am I comfortable doing? How much am I willing and able to have this affect my health, affect my time, affect my family, affect my work?
Right.
For me, I the only reason I was able to do this, to provide so much care for so long, was that I have my own business.
Hmm.
So I could shape my own schedule. Most people
Yes.
don't have that luxury.
Right. Right. And that's a whole other challenge
Yes.
um, for a separate conversation, I think. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on today that you would like to say or make sure people know or are thinking about?
I think we covered it.
Okay.
Again, the built environment is crucial. If you're not making sure it's working for you, you can be pretty sure it's working against you.
Yeah.
Um, make those plans, get emotional help, whether you're the caregiver or the care recipient. Um, think about your roles, make a plan, and revisit the plan. That's really crucial. And what I recommend is people put it in their calendars, set a reminder on your phone that quarterly you're going to take stock of what's happening and
Hmm.
are things working. Um, do a cost benefit analysis for help, for assistance. That was
Mhm.
one thing. I tend to feel like I need to do everything myself. Um,
Yeah.
and I was also very worried about my mother's finances.
Yep.
In my opinion, she had really great resources. She owned a home. She had significant investments. But when you start having care that's an average of 10 grand a month,
Right.
uh, it can go very quickly.
Mhm. Yes.
So I worried so much about her finances. And what I really should have done was paid for more help. I should have paid for maybe a care manager. I should have paid for um, strategy sessions, which
Hmm.
didn't exist, and to
Right.
develop a plan. Um, I should have paid for more, because when you do that cost benefit analysis, like, okay, well, what is it costing me? And sometimes it's hard to quantify.
Right.
So it's like, well, what's the impact on my health? I, I could qualify with how much time missing work or something, but
Right.
um, really, this is not a one person job.
No, it is not.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it is for a lot of people.
It's really,
So taking that look and seeing what you can do from a financial standpoint, what you can
mhm,
afford
right.
is critical.
Yes.
Even if it's um, networking in your community, talking with your church or your place of worship. There are often people who are happy to volunteer to
Mhm,
come and stay with someone for you for a couple of hours. They would not charge you for that.
right.
Um, there are places and people you can lean on. The big thing is taking that step and making yourself a little vulnerable and being open with folks about what's going on.
Mhm,
And if you don't want to disclose personal health information, you don't have to. You
mhm,
can just say, our family is experiencing something and we could use some help.
right.
And that's enough. And if people ask questions,
Right.
no is a full sentence. I don't want to
Right.
answer that is a full sentence. It's okay.
Right. And likewise, I would say that people should be more proactive in terms of offering help. I
Mhm.
received um, no assistance from friends or family when caring for my mom and caring for my husband. And granted, part of it was during COVID, but even after, and offer specific help. So I
Yes.
did have one or two occasions where somebody, um, for example, when my mother died, a neighbor said, "Can I get you groceries?" And
Yes.
I did it. I said no that day, but then she followed up a few days later and said, "I'm going to the store today. What can I pick up for you?" So offering specific help,
Yes.
dropping off a meal. I never received that, and
Yep.
it's being aware too, um, as a family member, a friend, a community member, that people are going through things, and what are little things you can do that will have a big impact for them.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, Mr. Greenhouse, thank you so much for your time today and for all of this really valuable advice and things to think about in the future.
Oh, you're so welcome. And so I just want to let your listeners know that they can reach out to me if they would like some information and resources. So my company is called Silver to Gold Strategic Consulting, and my website is silvertogoldstrategies.com. There's a contact page where they can request some information, and I'd be happy to send it their way.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. We'll be sure to include all of that information in the bio so that everyone can find it. All right. Well, everyone out there in the audience, thanks for joining us today and be sure to catch our next episode. Take care.
Thanks, Katie.